Hello, Collin College, and welcome to Powerful Teaching. My name is Dr. Pooja Agarwal, and it is such an honor to be with you here today to share the science of learning. I'd like to start by thanking President Matkin, each Vice President, Provost, and Dean across your district, and especially Dr. Allison Boye, the Director of the Center of Teaching and Learning at Collin College. To begin, I wanted to share with you that I am a cognitive scientist. I've been conducting research on how students learn for 15 years. I'm also a college professor. I teach about 100 college students every semester at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. So today I'll be sharing with you Powerful Teaching: Unleash the Science of Learning. To start, I'd like to provide you with a trivia question. How many bones are in the adult human body? So maybe think a moment, travel back to middle school or high school biology. How many bones are in the adult human body? We each have about the same number of bones. You can pause this video to think a little bit more about it. And the correct answer is 206. We each have about 206 bones in our body. So I just like starting off with that trivia fact to think about teaching and learning for ourselves and for our students. Today, I'd like to share just a tiny bit of research from cognitive science, but I really want to focus on the research-based teaching strategies, what that looks like for us in our classrooms every day, and then also next steps. How can we move beyond one and done? How can we ensure that we implement these teaching strategies effectively for us and for our students? All of today's slides are available at this website, retrievalpractice.org/Collin. There you can download the slides, access resources and research that I'll be mentioning today, and subscribe for an email newsletter. So again, all those resources are available at retrievalpractice.org/Collin. To start, here is a very, very simplistic model of how memory works. We start by encoding. Whether ourselves or our students, that's getting information into our minds. Students listen to lectures, they read textbooks, that's encoding that information. The next stage is storage. We hope that all of that information sticks, that it gets stored, that it's in our students' heads somewhere, and then we have students retrieve. What is that information you learned? Can you retrieve it and put it to use? That typically takes the form of assessments, midterms, finals, and papers, is asking students about that third stage to retrieve what they have encoded and what they have stored. What happens in classrooms is that we typically focus on that first stage, on getting information into our students' heads. What more than 100 years of research from cognitive science has demonstrated is that we need to focus on getting information out of students' heads. That is a critical piece of how students learn and how we can boost their long-term learning, is getting information out of students' heads. And this is what we call retrieval practice. It's simply bringing information to mind, mentally traveling back, engaging in a little bit of a mental struggle. And we know that, again, over 100 years of research, this type of retrieval practice boosts students' long-term learning. I really emphasize this with my own college students. We have a 15-week semester, and I want students to remember what they've learned beyond the semester, beyond the academic year, for years and years to come. So it's one reason why I'm really excited to share with you strategies about retrieval practice today. We also know from research that retrieval practice can take a lot of different forms to be effective. It can be low-stakes mini quizzes, it could be using tech tools, it could include just everyday writing prompts in the classroom. The powerful teaching strategies and tools I'll be sharing with you today fall under 4 categories. Retrieval practice, which I'll be focusing on as a foundation. spacing, interleaving, and feedback-driven metacognition. As an overview, one of the reasons why we love these power tools and teaching strategies is that they're research-based and research confirmed. What I mean by that is we already use these strategies in our classrooms. They're not new, but it's nice to know that research confirms what we're already doing is effective for our students' learning. Research demonstrates that these power tools are flexible across different content areas and ages, and I hope to show you some teaching strategies that do not require more prep, more grading, or more classroom time, but still benefit our students' learning. In terms of that tiny bit of research, I wanted to share that my colleagues and I at Washington University in St. Louis conducted research in real classroom settings. For the majority of this research, we conducted it in middle school and high schools near St. Louis, and with some quick clicker quizzes, kind of like today's Kahoots or tech apps, we were able to raise students' grades from a C to an A level when we compared teachers' lessons without retrieval practice to a teacher's lessons with very quick, low-stakes retrieval practice. We've also demonstrated that retrieval practice improves students' higher order learning at the middle school, high school, and college levels, so it's not just for basic facts. My colleagues demonstrated retrieval practice can improve student learning in complex engineering courses and also in medical school classrooms, where just this practicing what students know, what they have encoded and stored, can even improve medical students' diagnosis of neurology disorders. Some additional research that my colleagues and I conducted and published in 2021 with Ludmila Nunch and Janelle Blunt, we conducted a review of the entire literature of retrieval practice in classroom settings. We identified 37 studies with about 50 experiments. Of course, I can't go through each of these today. You can access this review of the literature at retrievalpractice.org/review. In general, our key findings were that the majority of effect sizes from each of these 50 experiments demonstrated medium or large benefits of retrieval practice in classroom settings, and also all of the conditions yielded a benefit. So it didn't matter if it was middle school or medical school, if it was quick quizzes during a lesson, or if it took a little bit more writing prompts, handwriting, typing, all of the different types of retrieval practice. Also, regardless of specific timing, improves student learning. So a further demonstration that retrieval practice can take many forms. Speaking of which, that's just the tiny bit of research. I want to jump into what this looks like in our classroom. So here are some of my students from the Berklee College of Music. I love teaching science with musicians. So I am in a bit of a different situation, which really provides some element of seeing how retrieval practice applies with students from a variety of different backgrounds. Of course, I have taught online for the past year and a half, and these strategies I'll be sharing with you apply in our classroom settings in person and also for remote learning. One of the first simplest strategies is this. Oftentimes we start our classes by telling students, here's what we did in class last week. That's focusing on encoding, getting information into students' heads. A simple difference to switch to retrieval practice is just asking students, what did we cover in class yesterday or in class last week? So instead of focusing on reviewing, we're just switching to retrieving by asking students that question. They could write down a quick thought or idea, really engaging again in that mental struggle, what we also call a desirable difficulty to retrieve what they've learned. Another simple strategy based on research is what teachers call a brain dump. We also call it free recall in the scientific literature, where we ask students to simply write down everything they can remember about a topic. So write down everything you have learned about a particular unit in a nursing course, or write down everything you can learn from a particular week in biology. For our college students, this could look like everything, or this could be a writing exercise for 5 minutes. We know from research, pulling that information out helps students organize their thoughts and promotes their long-term learning. A more specific version is what I call 2 things. It's just asking students to retrieve 2 things from last week, from the last class, about a particular unit or topic. And this can happen at any point. Again, research demonstrates the timing isn't too important. It's that we really engage students in retrieval. So you could have students write down or type 2 things as an entry ticket at the beginning of class, as an exit ticket, online, in forums, in the chat box, in class, in any variety of ways. Another strategy most all of us use, of course, is think, pair, share. Students think about a prompt, they pair up with someone and discuss, and then you have a whole classroom discussion. What I've noticed is that we sometimes skip the think step. Don't skip the think step. That's where retrieval practice happens. We want students to be engaged, but make sure that students are retrieving. They can write down or type what they know before they pair and share. One of my favorite tech tools that I use every semester is called Flipgrid. I don't have much time to go into it, but I hope you'll check it out. It's a way for students to post selfie-like videos where it's engaging, students can see each other's faces, and I find it a lot more engaging than just the written discussion boards on Canvas or Moodle or Blackboard. So I hope you'll check out Flipgrid. My students really enjoy it. And it engages them in retrieval practice without it being a stale writing prompting class. Some other things I wanted to mention: in my class, a lot of retrieval practice takes the form of mini quizzes. I used to do this in person. I've shifted it online to Google Forms, and I continue to use Google Forms. Again, this mini quiz can be done when students are entering Zoom or in class or as they're leaving. It can be a variety of tech tool apps. Maybe use Kahoot or Quizlet, Poll Everywhere, Slido. I use Google Forms. It can be written or typed. Research demonstrates that's less important than just getting students to retrieve. I've conducted research. It doesn't matter if retrieval practice is multiple choice or short answer. Use both. Use what's easy and works for you. And to highlight again, there is no optimal timing or spacing. The more retrieval practice, the better. The more we focus on getting information out of students' heads will boost their long-term learning. So again, retrieval practice, very flexible, low stakes, doesn't have to take a whole lot of time. It's important to keep in mind that retrieval practice in general is not an assessment strategy, it's a learning strategy. Of course, when students are taking a midterm or a final or writing a paper, they are retrieving, they're pulling information out, but by keeping in mind to make retrieval practice low stakes or no stakes, that highlights for students that retrieval is a good thing. The first time students retrieve should not be on a midterm or a final. Students should be engaged in pulling information out throughout every class throughout the semester to improve their long-term learning. Here are some quotes from my students throughout the semester. They love retrieval practice. Retrieval practices are the bomb. They actually love that they have these mini quizzes every week. And because I highlight retrieval practice as a learning strategy, I don't have midterms or finals in my class. My students love that we don't have a final. It's the best thing ever. We will be having a Q&A live with Collin College, so please do check out the website again, retrievalpractice.org/Collin, for more information about the Q&A. Again, that trivia fact, how many bones are in the adult human body? Take a minute, pause the video. I asked you about 15 minutes ago, and the correct answer is 206. This is an example of the next power tool called spacing, is literally spacing out what we teach over time. We all know that when students cram for a midterm or a final, they maybe stay up the night before. You probably did this when you were in college. We cram, we stay up, we do a bunch of practice problems even, we get a good grade on the exam, and then what happens? We forget it all. Ask your students this, they know that too. Cramming works in the short term, but spacing out retrieval practice improves learning over the long term. One simple way to do this is to ask students to retrieve previous content. So you could ask students to do a brain dump of what they learned yesterday, or even a brain dump of what they learned last month. That can seem a little intimidating to students, all the more reason to keep it no stakes or low stakes. You could also plan ahead to make sure that you are bringing content up every so often. One example is, let's say during the 8th week of the semester on my mini quizzes on a Google form, I asked students, what do you remember about childhood development or neuroscience from the 3rd week of the semester? My students have to engage in that struggle. They get comfortable with retrieval practice and they enjoy that challenge. Oh, what was it that we talked about childhood development? So it's just one way I ask students to retrieve previous content. So another thing, I just want to plant the seed, but we can talk about it during the Q&A, is think about, why do you give a midterm and a final? They're not a bad thing. They're one way to assess learning, but another way to think about it is, are you assessing cramming or are you assessing how much students have learned? So just planting that seed again, I look forward to talking more about that. A visual representation of spacing. In this example, students might cram their book. It's what we also call massed learning. Students are maybe studying for an hour and a half the night before, and then they take the exam or write a paper, whereas spacing is, let's say, students study half an hour on a Wednesday, half an hour on a Thursday, half an hour on a Friday, and then take the exam. Students will do well on the exam, and they will retain that information over time. So again, another simple example for our college students, or if you have kids at home, maybe you ask them, what did you learn in school today? And younger kids tend to say nothing, right? It's to simply ask, what did you learn in school yesterday? That added struggle, that added desirable difficulty improves long-term learning. Some additional information about spacing, again, retrieving previous content, whether students are spacing this out every day, every week, every month, that isn't quite as important as the more spacing, the better. Part of this is also to normalize forgetting. We forget. That's how learning works, and forgetting is actually a good thing for learning. Just like learning a foreign language, you kind of need to forget it. The next time you travel, it kind of comes back to you. That's where forgetting is a good thing. It actually strengthens learning. So talk about the forgetting process with your students. When we space out information, how I space things out with my Google Forms, it reduces cramming. Students aren't cramming in my class for midterm and a final. They're retrieving every week throughout the semester. And again, keep this no stakes or low stakes to emphasize retrieval practice is a learning strategy, not necessarily an assessment strategy. The third power tool is called interleaving. This is sort of taking spacing and making it hyper-specific. With interleaving, it's encouraging students to mix up similar content. And I'll give you an example in a moment. What this does, it improves students' discrimination. What's the similarity and differences between related concepts? We know from a lot of research that interleaving is helpful with discrete facts, let's say from biology, mathematics, formulas, the way to apply a formula for an addition problem versus a subtraction problem. Even for artistic paintings and learning art history, when students have to compare and contrast different paintings from different artists, and for language learning. So example, I took Spanish a few years ago, and I remember learning all of the nouns for different occupations and jobs, and then later we learned the nouns for different fruits and vegetables. And then we moved on. A simple example of interleaving is taking all those nouns and mixing them together. It may seem like they're pretty different, but it helps discriminate even for me. Oh, is that a noun related to the word orange, or does that noun kind of sound like the word for lawyer? That mixing up or interleaving improves students' learning. Another example here, let's say students are learning different topics in your class. So learning across the first 5 weeks of the semester or 5 key concepts. This example at the top is again what we call massed learning, going from topic to topic to topic. Interleaving is simply mixing that up. Some research suggests that maybe you want to start by blocking, focusing on each concept, and then mixing them together. You can think of this for your students like a flashcard deck. Instead of students going through a flashcard deck in order, is to have students shuffle that information to improve that discrimination, that comparison of similarities and differences. One example with my teaching with music students is I've had students trying to learn lyrics to a song, and they struggle. They can remember the beginning of the song and the end of the song, but that middle of the song is just kind of mushy in their heads. This is an example where interleaving comes in handy. Instead of a student practicing the song start to finish, I encourage them to interleave the different verses, the different chords of that song. So now students might start with the third verse and then play the first verse and then play the fourth and then the third and then the first and then the second half of the song, the first half of the song, and they put it all together. That might sound like it takes a lot of extra time, but actually students can do this in the same amount of time as if they were just going in order. So mixing it up helps my students learn a song. Mixing it up would help me learn nouns in Spanish. Mixing it up would help you learn some art history or paintings from different artists. Another trivia fact I like is to take a moment and think about what is the capital of Australia? Is it Melbourne? Is it Canberra, or is it Sydney? So again, you can pause this video, talk to someone next to you, retrieve the answer and write it down. What is the capital of Australia? And the correct answer is Canberra. Now, some of you may have been really confident that you knew the correct answer. You knew or thought that the answer was Sydney or Melbourne, but the answer is Canberra. This is an example of the fourth powerful teaching strategy called feedback-driven metacognition. Of course, we provide feedback to our students all the time. We need to remind ourselves and remind students that making errors are a good thing for learning, that mental struggle. We also need to encourage our students to take the next step to reflect on their learning, their metacognition, the sort of, that's so meta. It's thinking about their own thinking is what metacognition is. So once I asked you to retrieve the capital of Australia, then I could have asked you, how confident are you? Do you really think it's Canberra? Are you sure it's Sydney? Or are you just kind of guessing? That's metacognition, reflecting on your own learning. Again, research demonstrates that providing students with feedback, students retrieve, it improves their learning. Retrieval practice with feedback can double students' learning, and giving them metacognition prompts can further improve long-term learning. One example I use with my college students is if, for example, if I print out their mini quizzes, I would have simple checkboxes next to each question. Did students feel like they nailed it? Are they really confident in their answer, or are they not sure? And guessing is okay. But again, that takes the answer to the next step of how sure, how confident are you that you got the answer correct or incorrect. You can even have students draw smiley faces or sad faces on their sheets of paper. I do this on my Google Forms as well. Some additional metacognition prompts you could add to any of your forms of retrieval practice, whether it's a quiz, it's in person, it's on Flipgrid, it's on a discussion board. One example, how would you just rate your understanding today? That could be a simple prompt before students end class. How confident are you in your answer? And how much will you remember in 1 week from now? This is what we call a judgment of learning, or prediction, is to predict your learning into the future. Again, it helps students with their metacognition to reflect on what they've learned. Some next steps, again, moving us beyond one and done, that I'd like us to think about to unleash the science of learning. The first is that we have a live Q&A on January 13th. I would love your questions. Here is a QR code that you can scan. You can pause the video and scan it. You can also go to tinyurl.com/J22 questions. You can also, again, go to retrievalpractice.org/Collin, and there is a link there to submit your questions for me in advance. I really can't wait to hear from you and to discuss more about these powerful teaching strategies on January 13th. So please do submit your questions in advance. I'd like you to think about one strategy you can use in your classroom tomorrow. Again, whether it's remote or it's in person, I've mentioned the 4 different powerful teaching strategies or power tools: retrieval practice, spacing, interleaving, feedback-driven metacognition. Within each of those, I've provided a number of strategies: brain dumps, 2 things, metacognition prompts. What will work best for you in your classroom? You probably do some of this already. How can you provide students with more retrieval practice than you already do? So what are strategies you already use, and what's at least one strategy you can use tomorrow? Another way of thinking about it, what's something that you and colleagues in your department can collectively add to make sure all students, let's say within the nursing program, are constantly retrieving information? You could think even more broadly. What does this strategy look like across multiple courses, across an entire academic year, or as students are going from an introductory course to more advanced courses? But at least I want you to retrieve what is one strategy you can implement in your classrooms tomorrow. So again, I encourage you to pause this video, think about what is one strategy you can use tomorrow. If you've been taking notes during this presentation, I encourage you to put those away. Rely on your memory, that 3rd stage. Instead of encoding your own information, pull out what have you learned from this video already, and what can you do in your classrooms. As a reminder to sort of recap what we've talked about when it comes to our students' long-term powerful learning, is that you don't need to prep more or grade more or study more for our students in order to use these research-based strategies. To mention just a little bit about how you can incorporate these strategies for students, how can you sort of pass the torch? One thing I find so key is to model retrieval practice in our classrooms, getting students talking about it, getting them comfortable with forgetting, and then students can use a brain dump to study at home. They can use 2 things to study at home. There are a lot of variety of ways they can implement these powerful teaching strategies at home. Another thing I like to do with students is to have them reflect on their own studying. And I'm surprised that a number of my students say that they have never really thought about how they study. They've just kind of done it. So I like to discuss 3 questions with my students. How do you study? Why do you study that way? Did a teacher teach you or a parent? Did you just kind of figure it out? And does it work? And usually my students will say, kinda, because they recognize that cramming works in the short term, but that spacing out information and studying improves their learning in the long term. So I hope you'll have more conversations with your students to help pass that torch. These strategies can take 1 minute or less in our classrooms. I'm happy to talk more about this during the Q&A. I recognize that we are all pushed for time. There's so much content we need to cover for our students. Sometimes it can feel like a fire hose, and that's cramming as well. We don't want to necessarily cram information into our students' heads, especially if they're not retrieving it. So with these strategies, asking them a quick prompt as they're getting settled in the classroom, giving them a quick Kahoot, providing a Flipgrid outside of class, that doesn't take much classroom time. It actually saves time in the long run, which I find pretty important. The more students can remember and learn, the more you can move on to other content. So even thinking about, if I have a 90-minute class, an hour and a half, and I cover the same content or a little bit less in, let's say, 85 minutes, that will boost students' long-term learning. Another thing I'd like to add is keeping in mind that retrieval practice is a learning strategy. We don't have to grade any of this. I love more grading, said no one ever. I don't want more grading, right? So we can give ourselves permission, help our students retrieve, help boost their long-term learning, and you don't have to grade it at all. Again, these strategies can save you time. You're not grading, students are remembering more. You don't have to have review sessions anymore. Students are going to remember. They're going to pull information out instead of encoding and storing and cramming information in. So you will find that you can actually save yourself time. Last but not least, that trivia fact again, how many bones are in the adult human body? It's 206. A simple example of retrieval practice, spacing with feedback. If that's the only thing you remember from today's video, I hope you'll remember why, the underlying research-based proven strategy of retrieval practice. So with that, please keep in mind that we need to all unleash the science of learning together in our classrooms. I have a lot more resources at retrievalpractice.org/Collin. There again, you can submit your questions for the Q&A coming up and access more research, more resources, more free downloads about the science of learning. Thank you so much for your attention and for unleashing the science of learning.